Okay, we are here with Tony Farrell. It is the 13th of May 2014, and this last Friday, as you may or may not know, Tony was arrested when some bailiffs came round to repossess the property he was staying in. If you'd just like to sort of take it away from there, what happened on Friday morning, and pretty much from the start, really.
Right, from the start of the morning, or the process of the eviction?
The process of the eviction. I don't want to know what you had for your breakfast.
Well, just for people that didn't know, I was invited to stay at a house a while back by Moed Bib. It was a friend of Moed Bib's house. He was the dad of a deceased, so the house was all in probate. And around about the back end of last year, repossession proceedings started by HSBC Bank against this, and I just happened to be in there by invite. The dad of the deceased was living abroad, but occasionally came, and the whole thing was a little bit difficult to sort out. And I was part of the process where I became a bit of a Mackenzie friend when the whole issue was being sorted out. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we soon got to a position where the house was going to be possessed in the new year. And on possession day, I stayed in the property, and the reason for that, primarily...
Sorry, well, for the tape, for the benefit of the tape, repossession, what day was that, repossession day, the original one?
The repossession of the property, I believe, was the date and don't quote me on this, it was about the 29th of January that the possession date was going to happen.
The original date?
I think so, yeah,
oh, okay.
From recollection. And so I knew that in advance, you know, that the property was going to be repossessed on that particular date, and that we had to be out. And I had no intention of vacating that property at that stage. And there were two main reasons for that. One, it was HSBC Bank, and I just sort of took I knew HSBC Bank were part of the sort of bank system that had profited from the 9/11 false flag attack. The way they did that was on put options. There was the Deutsche Bank that made that put on abnormal put option spread betting on the 3 days on American Airlines and United Airlines.
A put option is
a put option is a bet that the shares will go down, and you make profit from that if it does. So they bet on something that was statistically around about 1,200% above average on these two airliners, and these were the 3 days before 9/11, and these were the two airliners that you know, the shares plummeted as a result of their so-called involvement in the 9/11 attacks. Now the thing was that the head of the CIA, Buzzy Cronsard, was the head of the Deutsche Bank, which was the lead bank in the enormous amount of money that was made on this put options 3 days before 9/11, but also included were Merrill Lynch, the associated bank of HSBC. Now, alongside all the other criminality of HSBC Bank, and also I could see the cover-up executive-wise at the Canary Wharf premises on the day of 7/7 when there were incidents at outside Canary Wharf. So with all that global criminality of the banking system, be it insurance fraud, be it mortgage fraud, be it dealing with drug cartels, be it actually money laundering, all these global crimes were there to document. So I used the legislation that Tony Rook had used quite effectively with withholding his BBC licence. That is, if he's got reasonable cause to suspect an organisation has been involved in terrorist activity, then it would be an offence to give money or service to that organisation, right? If you've got reasonable cause to suspect. And I thought, and he applied that against the BBC on 9/11 for the advance sighting of Building 7 before it happened. So I was attracted by that legislation, the legislation that you can turn back on them, and it's only reasonable cause to suspect. So I think, well, certainly, nobody could deny that I haven't got reasonable cause to suspect HSBC, given the massive global evidence and the 9/11 stuff, and also the 7/7. So, and their engagement with known terrorist countries, and so all that was there in the melting pot for me. So I felt obliged and compelled to say, well, I'm going to stand up to this.
So you'd got all this evidence and compiled it all together?
Yeah, so I put it together and sent
it.
it to, at the start of these proceedings for the possession of the house. I put this evidence before the judges and gave it to the dad of the deceased to put and put before the judge as well as an objection to HSBC taking possession of the property, notwithstanding all the other arguments that were around.
Despite the fact that it's in probate still,
yeah, and yes, there were still all those arguments were valid, yeah, that were being used by the dad of deceased. But over and above that was two component parts: the criminality of HSBC Bank and their suspected terrorist activity. Right. But I also used, on this occasion we took the opportunity to use the challenge to the court process, the challenge to the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the court, yeah, based on the Queen, and the Queen swore in an oath, yeah, and an oath to God that she'd maintain the law to the utmost of her power, a law which she broke from day one and continues to do so. Yeah. So they were the thrusts, right? So I felt morally compelled to make the stance and see what happens. And I wasn't quite sure how it would all unfold, but lo and behold, when I didn't move out, the next step emerged as the eviction notice, which the occupant was served on the occupant being me.
And your invited guest.
Yeah. So and interestingly, this was interesting because I wasn't quite sure when I was going to get the eviction notice. It came a lot later, and when it came, I couldn't believe it. I could believe it because it came on. The eviction appointment was going to be on the 15th of April at 11:30, and the 15th of April was immediately struck a chord with me because I knew full well. I mean, I'd got tickets for the memorial service at Anfield because it was the 25th anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster. So coming from South Yorkshire Police, I thought that was quite interesting. So, and I was quite pleased that it landed on that day for whatever reason it did, whether it was by just chance or whether there was something about that. But when it did, it did. Now, when on the 15th of April, I decided to do two things. One, I went to see the Chief Constable at 7 o'clock in the morning and collar him, and I had people with me because people like Seven and Patrick Cullinan had come up from London. There were in total a team of 7 in the course of the day. David Pidcock was there, a guy called Joseph Henry who's had 24 properties taken away from him, David Pidcock's wife, and Ian Powell. So we had 7 all in a day, but 3 of us went to the headquarters of police, and that's when we collared David Crompton. I had a discussion about the eviction. Now, we've got all this on camera to be produced in a short time. But what we got from Crompton was we collared him, and with 7 been there because we handed over a report between us, 240-page report, 6 months ago to South Yorkshire Police. And we hadn't had any response. So I thought this is a golden opportunity with 7 here for me to collar him as he parked his car up, right? And then say, gently remind him that I'm going to be evicted, and then get 7 to talk about why she hasn't had a response to the report. And the response was from David Crompton that he hadn't seen the report, which had been directed to senior command team, but he gave an undertaking to give her a response, a considered response, which was a good news for us because it's tied in with it now, and he's got to make some kind of response because we've got him on camera. Right. So, but then back at the house, we had the reception party waiting for the bailiffs because we knew full well that we were going to come at 11:30. When they did come, it was all filmed and it will shortly be available. And it was quite interesting because they obviously hadn't anticipated a reception party. They had a bag van for all the rubbish that they were hoping, and a few hoodies waiting outside who were in denial that that's what they were doing. When we actually politely went up to them and asked them what are they waiting outside for, they were just gardeners, but subsequently proved to be, you know, liars. And then 2 bailiffs came, sat in the car for a long time because I don't think they anticipated that they were going to have quite the reception party that they had. You know, with 4 cameras rolling and you know, 7 of us and a chauffeur to blow at them. They had the windows down and they wouldn't talk and they wouldn't engage. And we thought, well, what are they going to do all day? And after about an hour of just waiting in the cars, and with us talking to them, but they were not really engaging, a police car eventually arrived. I had a chat with the police officer, I explained the situation, told him I'd been to see the chief constable, told him who I was, and told him that the bailiffs haven't done anything yet. And then the bailiffs then went to see the police. And eventually, after the discussion with the police, where we were trying to film, and the bailiffs then came and tried to get into the house. Well, I stayed outside the house. The house was adorned by A3 laminated pictures of things like 7/7 inside job, MI5 did it, and anything that would provoke, in terms of my reasoning for my stance against the banksters, based on Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act.
So when will this...
I also had a clock on the outside of the house stuck at 3:15. Significance being it was the 25th anniversary of Hillsborough, with 3:15 cut off on the coroners being quite a significant part of the corruption process and the cover-up of Hillsborough, with a plastic bobby's helmet stuck high. So people, all the neighbourhood would be thinking, what's going on here? And it was quite visual, and it was a beautiful day.
For the benefit of the tape, do you just want to tell people the relevance to Hillsborough and yourself?
Yeah, well, I was a principal intelligence analyst. I got after 17 years of service there, I got dismissed for not sort of bearing false witness over terrorism and the terror threat, when I disbelieved 7/7 and 9/11, but was expected to say that the threat's coming from Islamic extremism based on the fact that 23 Muslim suicidal maniacs did it. Now with Hillsborough, I wasn't an actual whistleblower of Hillsborough in force. I wasn't at Hillsborough on the day, but I was told a particular story about Hillsborough towards the back end of my career in South Yorkshire Police, which had never been told, and that story was from an officer, senior police staff who was there on the day and was in the control room where the decision making in the CCTV was, and he shared a story with me on the 20th anniversary of Hillsborough. After he'd been talking to Meredith Hughes, the chief constable, who had been fronting the cameras, and I think it was David Conn from The Guardian had given him an interview. This is the chief constable, Meredith Hughes, about the Hillsborough and the police cover-up of it, and where we were going with disclosure. So I had Andy Hymus, the guy he was a young press officer on the day, spill the beans on what actually happened. And the thing that seems to, from Andy's point of view, that was covered up was the fact that the highest ranking officer in the stadium on the day, a guy called Walter Jackson, who was an assistant chief constable, was in the director's box, and then when he saw things happening, he went over to the control room where the CCTV was to see if he could help, and for whatever reason crumbled to such an extent that when Andy was asked to get into the control room for some information to find out what was going on, an assistant chief constable, right, was underneath the table of the control room, actually underneath the table of the control room, gibbering. Right now, if you look at the statements of officers like Andy Hymus, officers like ACC Walter Jackson, and officers in the control room, there's no mention of any of that. But Andy told me that on the 20th anniversary.
So the significance of that
So the significance
is to be evicted from the house.
Well, Hillsborough we know is a cover-up. even though I witnessed the current Chief Constable David Crompton on the 4th of February in a speech about police, in a talk, a convivial talk in a local back room of a pub.
This was at the Greystones? This
was at the Greystones in Sheffield, that I managed to get wind of a day before it happened. So here's the Chief Constable talking about corruption, right? Giving a talk about, let's bring back the Robert Peel's principles of policing, by public consent, trust, integrity, talking all the normal police rhetoric and exposing police corruption in other police forces. So he named examples that he named would have been the Plebgate, the Cleveland scandal, and he mentioned Mark Duggan, he mentioned Steve Lawrence, and more or less picked the fight with corruption with the Metropolitan Police. The irony of it is, he didn't only recognise me, well I know he didn't recognise me in the first half of his talk until the interval, but he went on the record in front of this audience and said what we really want to do is encourage whistleblowers. So you can imagine the irony of that, given that
you're in the audience.
I was in the audience, and I'm quite well known as a whistleblower in South Yorkshire Police, that when I spoke the truth they felt the need to sack. So that was quite interesting, but it all we'd been able to go to that talk on corruption, be able to confront the Chief Constable, both at the interval and in some question and answers, and then subsequently have my eviction falling on the Hillsborough day. So I felt it was meant to be, and I was going to make a meal of it, visually, to almost like put South Yorkshire Police in a difficult position. Right, where ultimately they might have to make a decision on arresting me. And I think that was the game plan, to make life difficult for South Yorkshire Police. I'm not particularly interested in I'm not largely concerned with bailiffs and things like that. I know it's a problem, but it's not my primary interest. My stance was against the banks,
right,
in this instance, right?
Yeah.
First and foremost. And one method I felt as though I could at least make a stance, irrespective of the outcome, was Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act, and a combination of the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the courts,
right,
and the sheer criminality of HSBC Bank.
Yeah.
Now, irrespective of the chances of winning like that, I felt as though it's going to put them in an embarrassing situation where they're going to have to act.
So am I right in assuming that on April 15th you managed to repel the bailiffs?
Well, yeah, they would not show any paperwork. When they came to the door, I would not give them my consent. And I prepared an HSBC booklet called Banksters Are Us, and I'd also done a leaflet which was called Cleggate, because the house that I'd been evicted from was not less than 200 yards away from Nick Clegg's office. Right, so we prepared a little Cleggate eviction and made that look good. Distributed all that throughout the neighbourhood, right, with booklets, and we had a Bankster or Us booklet to hand to the bailiffs and the police should they come. So, which would give them a glimpse of why I was doing this.
Right. It
was showing all their criminality. So when the bailiffs came to the door, two of them, no consent, and I stood outside what was a shared house with 4 flats, and they asked me to move aside. I asked why, and they said, well, it's a shared area. So I withdrew straight away. I didn't challenge that first one. I withdrew to the front door of my flat, okay, and stood in front of that. So then he asked me to move aside, and I said, I'm not moving aside. I said, will you show me your identity, your warrant card and the paperwork? And he said he wasn't prepared to do that. He'd spoken to the police and showed the police the paperwork. I'd already said to the police, I do not believe their police paperwork will be in order. And at that, when I turned round to him and said, you're not getting my consent to move past me, he more or less called it a day and said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Farrell, we'll be back, I'll see you again. And he walked out. And just before he did, I'd given him a booklet, and he treated it with utter disdain, because you could be seen on the camera ripping the booklet up because all he wanted was my name to take back. So they then really drove off down the street, and we were blowing the chauffeur, and we were, you know, quite pleased with the result. It didn't show the bad lads in good light, because they were cowering with the hoodies when we were asking them questions, and we got all that on video. We also got one of the bailiffs and collared him on his own, and we were trying to talk to him and appeal to his better nature. And there were 3 or 4 of us all giving him questions about why he was doing this. Would he not consider looking at the arguments as to why, you know, what these banksters are doing? And we were trying to educate him. Now, it was an interesting interaction, because his physiology was taught. You could see he was tormented. He didn't know what to do, in as much as he wasn't willing to say anything. But we were showing him things. We were pointing to the Hillsborough stuff, the 315 clock, the police, and we were talking about, this is the corruption that's going on in the world, and we were showing him the banking system and talking about various strands of the corruption within the banking system and how everything's run. While the other guy was in with the police. And this is all really good stuff that we caught on camera and will be published as a bit of a film that we compiled.
I know you're going to tell us in a bit about at the moment you haven't got access to your computers and
stuff. No, well...
when do you expect we can look at this footage, Tony?
Well, it's been prepared as a film, as a good quality film.
Right.
And so I don't know quite when it's finished, but we're not anticipating it'll be too long.
Right.
But to get back to what happened, because... Yeah. We thought then that it would be safe to go back into the property with all my equipment back in, because we'd get notice and could do it again if we had to. Although I knew that being back on the property on my own, I ran the risk of them coming back. And if I was on my own, then they'd probably be able to quite easily find a way of getting through if there was no support and no witnesses. But it bought an extra 3 weeks, because on the 9th of May, I hadn't heard anything, but on the 9th of May, early in the morning, 8 o'clock, they came. And I was on my own in the property, and there were 4 bailiffs with a big white van. And they tried to get into the flat straight away through the door, and the door was locked, and I explained I was inside, who I was, and they were fully aware of who I was. And I stood behind the door when they were threatening to bang the door in and were asking me to stand aside. I asked them through the peephole, to show me their warrant card again and their paperwork through the peephole before I opened the door, and they declined, saying we do not need paperwork. But what they did do was openly admit that the first time he came on the 15th of April, they come with the incorrect paperwork. So we got that. They admitted that. Now, at that point, because there were 4 bailiffs, 1 person, no other witnesses, I rang the police, because I didn't know. I didn't feel threatened by them to bang the door in, because I thought they'd be quite sensible. But I thought it's wise here now to call the police.
Yeah.
And the police came in about 5 minutes. In all that time, the bailiffs, for 5 minutes, were imploring me to move away from the door for my own health's sake. But I never once felt they were actually doing anything other than tampering with the lock. They weren't trying to put the shoulder behind the door. But I was actually stood behind the door. So had they have done, I probably would have got hurt, but then they would have been probably in trouble. Okay, so that was the tactic. When the police arrived, it was a single officer but in a van, and I asked the police identified themselves through the peephole, and I thought the best thing here now is to fully cooperate. So I said, okay, police officers here, I'll try and open the door. Well, I couldn't open the door because of the tampering with the locksmith had already done the other side. So I passed the key in, they opened the door up, and I retreated into the lounge, and they followed me, the bailiffs and the police officer. And the bailiffs dealt with me first and asked me to vacate the property, and but without showing any identification, any paperwork whatsoever. So I turned to the police officer and pointed this out, and he said, I've seen the paperwork, so it's all in order. And I said, okay, then the only way I'm going out of this door today is if you arrest me, or they arrest me, or because I am staying put, I'm not giving my consent. It says you're in danger because I've got reasonable cause to suspect that HSBC are involved in terrorist activity. Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act 2000 applies, and it says to the officer, if you persist knowing that, and there's the evidence, and gave him the booklet produced about all the criminality of HSBC Bank, there's the evidence, you, please sir, are committing a crime under Section 44 of the Serious Crime Act. In other words, he's encouraging you to commit a crime, which he would have been doing, what he has done.
Yeah.
Because what he chose, it says, alternatively, arrest the bailiffs for encouraging me to commit a crime if they persist, or just walk away. Not surprisingly, and I knew I wasn't naive enough to think that was going to do the trick, but I was quite happy to be arrested. Mentally, I prepared myself, if come, I'll be arrested. And the police officer said, I'll ask you for one last time, will you, the law requires you to leave. So I says, cuff me then, because you're going to have to arrest me. He says, I'm not cuffing you, but you are under arrest. So I made the decision to walk out with him gently, just like that. And one of the bailiff manager sat in the same van. I got put in the back, and I was very well treated by the police. And the bailiffs remained to deal with whatever they wanted to do with the property, with the locksmith, with all my stuff inside. Okay. So I got arrested, taken down to the county court, put in a cell for a little while, and then taken back to the magistrates' court and the Bridge Street custody suite. I was interviewed by the police officer, recorded, and after about an hour's interview, where I gave all my reasons, I was charged with the offence of obstructing the bailiff.
Now, you know, on your charge sheet, I'm assuming they gave you a charge sheet. On your charge sheet, what section does that come under?
Just bear with me.
What act?
Just while you get to that, can I ask, when they actually arrested you, did they go through you have the right to remain silent?
Oh yes, yeah. They did.
Did you, when they said, do you understand, what was your response to that?
I said, yeah. I think I cooperated. I didn't. Well, I'll tell you what happened when we go through this, because you asked me a question first about what was the contrary to section. I'll just put my glasses on. Contrary to section 10(1) and 4 of the Criminal Law Act. So it says here on the charges on Friday the 9th of May at Sheffield, I resisted John Griffith, that's an officer of the court, engaged in executive process issued by the High Court for the purpose of enforcing the judgment or order for the recovery of the delivery of possession of premises at 32 Amthorpe Road, Nether Green, Sheffield, contrary to section 10(1) and 4 of the Criminal Law Act. 1977.
So that's section 10.1 and point
4 of the Criminal Law Act 1977.
You got iPod?
So anyway, that's what, and the summary of the evidence was basically, the key evidence was is a matter is from the police constable PC 807 Hawker, who has entered the premises with bailiffs, identified himself and bailiffs, so establishing identity that was not challenged at the scene. That's wrong. Explained the lawful requirement to leave the premises in accordance with the warrant, and then arrested Farrell when he failed to comply. And then later on he describes that he made a gentle arrest. Well, he did make a gentle arrest, to be fair to him. It wasn't confrontational with the police. When I got to the custody, I was treated okay. I had the interview, I was charged. In response, when they say, have you your right to reply, I said, yeah, you've arrested, you've made an incorrect arrest, you should have arrested the bailiffs under section 44 of the Serious Crime Act 2007 on the basis of section 15 Article 3 of the Terrorism Act being applicable, and I told you so. So you've made your decision, and it says It's probably the easiest arrest you've ever made, but potentially could be the most explosive one you've made too. And it was all very civil. So then the officers at the custody suite said, "Have you got a house to be bailed to?" I said, "No." So for that reason only, I was remanded in custody overnight because they couldn't fit me through into the courts that afternoon. So Saturday morning comes and I spent the night in a cell, no complaints there, no big deal, and I didn't want legal representation, so that's when I went into court. David Pidcock and his wife and Ian Powell were there in the courtroom, and I was asked to make a plea. So before I made the plea, I said a few things about Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act, and the Serious Crime Act, and the challenge to sovereignty and jurisdiction. I asked them, was this actually, will a transcript of this particular hearing or a recording of it be available? And they said it wouldn't be on this occasion, in this particular part of the process. So I made a plea of not guilty to the charge. Now, it's not that I have resisted a bail, but I said that with a caveat, because I said, because there are extenuating, mitigating circumstances, those circumstances being there is a bigger crime that's been taken place, basically. There's a crime of Section 15, Article 3 of the Terrorism Act, and also Section 44 of the Serious Crime Act. So that's the way I played it. So they adjourned for a hearing on the 19th of May, which is Monday. It's a hearing simply to set the trial date, so that's really going to be a non-event.
Pre-trial review. Yeah.
It's not going to. There's going to be no big deal there. They'll just, unless they drop the case, but basically they'll set a date for a trial at the magistrate's court, and that's when I need to start mounting my defence. So that's the situation we're in at the moment. I mean, for me, when I was released, then I was like, no fixed abode, but one kind soul that was there has given some 11th hour assistance, very kindly so too. And then I had the logistical problem of this was what I was arrested in, and that I didn't know long everything that I had possessed was inside the house that the locksmith had boarded up.
You're still aware that, as far as you know, it still is?
As far as I know, I mean, I wasn't actually sure what was going on because it was the weekend, so I couldn't contact the county court. So I had to wait till Monday morning. I went to the county court to inquire as to the process to recover the personal possessions to which I'm entitled, and they gave me enough information, but I genuinely believe it wasn't deliberate. I think they got hold of the wrong end of the stick and thought I wanted to get back into the house to live in it. That was the request, but it wasn't. And they turned around, you've got to make an application, it's got to cost you £155, and if you don't have that, you can apply for the remission fee. So I was running around like a blue-ass fly, trying to get a court order together and an application form and all the statements, from the bank, in order to try and set the process up to try and get my stuff back. Right? And I thought, well, I'll have to keep the pressure on. So this morning, I know this will take a while, I'll have to be down there and just badgering them. And I'm glad I did, because this time I managed to see the bailiff's office, because I knew that I'd found out that the bailiff's office was open at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay. So I managed to see the bailiff manager. He says, no, that doesn't apply. The bailiff, you're done with the bailiffs now. What will have happened is that your property has been secured by the locksmith that was there on the day, and that there'll be a security company now, and your stuff will have all been left inside. And the way to actually get access to the personal possessions, you've got to ask the permission of the bank. Right, so I've had to get in contact with the bank solicitors, and knowing full well that I'm like having a big pop at HSBC Bank, I've now got to ask their cooperation in allowing me to get access to that property. Now, what happens if they stall? Well, it's obviously very inconvenient for me with very little money, and this is the only resources I've got with me. So all my stuff, computers, all that, are locked in at the moment until I get news that I can actually act.
So you require them to reinstate your property?
I require that. Yeah. I went to a solicitor today just for the advice on Monday, without free advice. And they suggested that I actually contact the police officer that arrested me to exert pressure on HSBC Bank. Now, I'm not quite sure whether that's a good idea, given that he, in my opinion, has committed a far bigger criminal offence than I have.
Yeah.
He's committed an offence under Section 44 of the Serious Crime Act, and I'm half tempted to go in and from reception at headquarters and try and report a crime committed by a police officer, which is a serious offence.
What's your motivation for taking this course of action? What's the end result that you'd like to see?
Well,
is there an end result?
I don't know in terms of what the outcome will be. What I would like to see happen, and why I've done this, is because morally I think it's right to do so, to stand up against the bully boys, stand up against the bank, right? And it's a morally right thing for me to do, because not everybody would suspect HSBC Bank and engage in terrorist activity. It's just I've had an interest in 9/11, 7/7, and I was an intelligence analyst in the police force that actually lost my job because I stood up against corruption. So seeing the corruption globally, where there are opportunities to stand up, whether it's a case of, well, what's my chance of winning or not, it's a case of doing what's right morally and not. So I was not prepared to commit an offence that would potentially carry lifetime in prison. Now, I'm not naive enough. I'm not saying that for one moment that had I handed over this willingly, the police would have said, you've committed offence and arrest. I knew that'd be nonsense. Never say that. But if they were to apply the letter of the law, they would be compelled, because I was there openly declaring that they've got reasonable cause to suspect. So I was inviting them to make a ridiculous decision, because the legislation they've brought in is ridiculous. And it's legislation that when you use craftily to turn it against them,
they don't want to know.
They can't deal with it.
No.
Yeah, and I know, I never once sensed that South Yorkshire Police have got it in for me in that way. I think there's a fair amount of respect by them for what I did. Right? Whether they like it now that I keep having a pop at them is another matter. I don't know the answer to that exactly. I don't believe I've been, short of being sacked, I don't believe I've been particularly victimised by South Yorkshire Police. Right? They defeated me, but they didn't try and ridicule me in the tribunal process. And the only reason why they defeated me is because it's all wire pulled. I was never going to be allowed to win. Right? But do I have their respect for doing what I've done? Probably I do. Right? Do they like it that I'm popping at them all the time? I'm not sure what they think of it. My hope, in one sense of all doing it, is that a force that's got its back to the wall, as I've spoken, at one of the presentations early in the year, is that somewhere, some way, South Yorkshire Police turn good. I don't know how many people realise this, but if you go to South Yorkshire Police website, they've got the stated aim of being the best police force in the country. What a bold statement for a force that's probably in the firing line for being guilty of the biggest known cover-up in police history, Hillsborough.
Yeah.
Right? Now that's not to say Hillsborough's the worst cover-up that we've ever had, because I'm absolutely certain it isn't. But it's certainly a demonstrably provable cover-up of terrible proportions. Right? So the only way that, as I sort of tried to articulate at my presentation here last time, was if South Yorkshire Police want to walk their talk, they've got to start making some difficult decisions and start making a ripple effect by making the right decisions in difficult areas. And I've given them numerous opportunities to make difficult decisions, because all along I'm hammering away with letters to the Chief Constable, respectful letters, but letters saying that he should do this. So in this process that's unfolded, there's a number of occasions where I've pointed out to him that the judge has committed a criminal offence and that he should be, if he was maintaining the law,
should be arrested.
He should be man enough to walk the talk and arrest the judge, whether it be for breaking jurisdiction and sovereignty and committing an offence that way, or supporting and committing an offence under Section 15 Article 3 of the Terrorism Act. Either way, he's committing a criminal offence. Therefore, the police should take action, and the police are making an abject failure and not. And likewise, the key person that I feel is culpable now, as a result of the eviction process, is the arresting officer, not the bailiffs. I'm not really interested in the bailiffs. In my particular stance, it's the officer that made the decision to arrest me. It was his choice. He could have arrested the bailiffs. It was his duty to look at the serious criminality I'm alleging and the evidence I was presenting in front of him, when all he wanted to do was take the word of the bailiff, probably not even look at the paperwork, and get the job done. And that, in effect, is what we're dealing with. So I, in a friendly manner to the arresting officer, Leo Hawker, PC 807, was saying that you do know, don't you, that I will be coming after you for a wrongful arrest. In the nicest possible way, and for the stated reasons that you should have arrested the bailiffs, or at least warned the bailiffs to back off, because they are encouraging me to commit an offence according to the letter of the law. Yeah. And that nobody can deny me the argument that I've got reasonable cause to suspect, given what I went through. I lost my job because of it. I went through all the way up to the Royal Court of Justice, and nobody once said I wasn't genuine. So whether it was right or wrong with my beliefs, and most certainly I wasn't wrong actually, I have certainly got reasonable cause to suspect, and I've got reasonable cause to suspect HSBC, and it's been before the courts on numerous occasions this, and it's been before the Chief Constable in letters. They are simply turning a blind eye. So I'm quite pleased with the position where I'm at, because yes, I'm only in a magistrate's court. The prison sentence potentially is no more than 6 months. Now, what's the probability if they find me guilty, and they're almost certainly going to find me guilty, that I'll be sent down to prison? I don't know. There's an outside chance, I suppose. It depends really how I behave.
If you are, he gets his spare room.
And there's a court, but the likely scenario is a caution if I behave myself in the conduct of the trial hearing. But I will not pull any punches. When I get to the trial, I will say, I will let the judge know that should he think about making a decision of finding me guilty, he will have committed an offence.
The judge himself?
The judge will be committing an offence under the various acts that have mentioned, Section 44 of the Serious Crime Act. And with the evidence that's been before the judges that will be before them, also.
So you've already got a pre-trial hearing. You're expecting them to go to magistrates. Yeah. You're expecting then for the magistrates to take it to Crown. Is that
no, it will not go to Crown, not unless I escalate it with another offence.
Right. Okay.
Now, whether they'll see my defence, which will be very offensive, in terms of you, judge, should be arrested. The police officer is now a criminal, has committed a criminal offence, and actually the bailiffs have too, right? So there are mitigating circumstances. Sure, I did it. In one sense, I resisted bailiffs. Yes, according to the letter of the law. But it's the similarities. Let's suppose this situation. I see a drowning child in a pond, but there's a perimeter fence around that pond saying we will prosecute any trespassers.
Yeah.
I decide to jump over the fence, dive in, and try and rescue that child. It's the equivalent then of somebody who witnessed that saying you're going to be prosecuted because you've trespassed.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, short of trespass, but what would have been the worst offence to do nothing?
Yeah.
But it's even worse than that, because I'm seeing criminal offences being taken place here. Right? And that they are every time the police are taking the easy decision, and that if South Yorkshire Police want to be the best force in the country, then they need to tell them full circle and stop making the easy decisions, stop making these decisions that go with the flow and go absolutely 100% against the tide. And I've given them in many instances, that's been since I got out, that has been my strategy, to always turn it back to South Yorkshire Police. That's why when Seven's case, 240-page report, where part of the problem was the Metropolitan Police cover-up with everything, when she'd been to the police 66 times for help, 65 times for help. In a motorist case, they don't need to go into details for. Where do you go after that when the IPCC won't look at it? And you, as an analyst, I can stand back and say, what monstrous cover-up in the court system, and what awful treatment by the police. I go to my own backyard, South Yorkshire Police, and say, there you are, you sacked me. But have a look at that. You talk about corruption, yeah. Where do you go to? Give them a report. This is where I live. I'm an author of this report. This is about corruption in another force and a judicial system on a massive scale. I'm giving it you on a platter. Do I get a response? No. This time around, and that the purpose of going to the headquarters at 7 o'clock in the morning, because I knew that's when the senior command team get in. I knew strategically that we could corner Crompton, the chief constable, and corner other senior command team members, right? And with 7 being there, who handed this report into South Yorkshire Police on the 5th of July last year, and hasn't heard from them since, right? Which is an appalling way to not even acknowledge the criminality that we've handed over. He then says, I've not seen the report. But at least this time round, we've got him on camera saying that it will be part of a film. It won't be just, the film just won't be about the eviction process. You know, hopefully anyway, when this film comes out, it will be a component part, and it will cover aspects of that, and the focus, we will certainly be able to show you in clear terms the undertakings that the Chief Constable gives, and me certainly talking about that talk that the police, David Crompton, had on corruption when he was calling every other force, well, not every other, sorry, he was calling out and, you know, confessing the sins of other police forces while mentioning none of his own. One thing to end on that he said was that Hillsborough is not yet proven to be a cover-up. Right? So make of that what you will. I made of that as it was the most unwise and insensitive thing to say, because any decent person, righteous person, looking at Hillsborough, even if it hasn't been officially declared, should not be saying that it's not been a cover-up. It most certainly has been a terrible cover-up, and for the Chief Constable to say that in the public is very unwise. And I'm quite happy to go open on that and say it.
There were a lot of families in Liverpool that disagree with that statement.
Well, most of the country would.
Yeah.
You know, even if officially it hasn't yet been declared a cover-up, he shouldn't be saying it. He should be actually very repentant and saying, we know it's a cover-up, the police now are cooperating. Yeah. He shouldn't be saying it's not been proven it's a cover-up. That is very unwise of him. Yeah. And certainly not befitting of a Chief Constable who has aspirations to lead a force that aims to be the best force in the country. And I've told him so, and I told him so in a 27-page report, which was a specific response to his talk on corruption. And at some stage, I can easily make that available, because in that particular report, which was done before I got the eviction notice, I actually invited David Crompton at the end of it to come with me to Anfield at the 25th Memorial Service for the purpose of trying to be present in order to speak the truth to the people who need to hear that truth. Yeah. And to say unequivocally sorry for the role that successive Chief Constables and other senior staff of South Yorkshire Police have played in hiding the truth. And finally, to have the full truth come out about Hillsborough. Because my great concern is Walter Jackson under the table is still not going to come out. And they're not going to get away with it. So they've got to do something and come clean. But not just come clean on Hillsborough, come clean on other aspects of corruption. And I've labelled those areas of corruption within South Yorkshire Police, because we've got Orgreave, we've got the child abuse cover-ups in Rotherham, we've got the Vicky Hay case, We've even got the treatment of the former principal analyst, one of the officers who refused to change his witness statement. Bear in mind, Hillsborough is all about, the cover-up is all about changing. In excess of 100 officers have had their witness statements changed, right? And previous judges have known this, right? And even actually itemised this, but not concluded that it's a cover-up. So it's the whole thing. The politicians knew, the judges knew, Lord Justice Stuart Taylor, right? Stuart Smith, and also now we've got the independent panel. We've made major headway in getting to the truth. We've now got a difficult year ahead for South Yorkshire Police, where criminal investigation, criminal charges, they're going to be facing, officers are going to be faced with that. But if the truth doesn't come out this time round, well, get ready. And I just hope this time that they really do mean that they want to become the best force, and that they do something to show it. And that something has to be something that causes a big ripple effect across the police service.
And I think people in South Yorkshire should be reminding police officers when they see them that they are part of a corrupt organisation.
Yeah. And what I will say though is that it's going through that process of being arrested, like I was. I mean, I've never had a criminal record, and going through the process yourself, spending a night in a cell and being interviewed, fingerprinted. What I will say actually though, that the treatment of those officers who were dealing with you and the servicer guy in the cell, and listening to others that were being treated, was very good. It wasn't,
I don't mean that you should be disrespectful to them.
And there are good officers, civil officers, and even in the time when an officer was arresting me, he was tortured. And I think, I don't think he knew who I was at first. I don't think this was planned by South Yorkshire Police. He was just like the first on the scene, and he was on the scene because I called him. It wasn't the bailiffs that called him. And I think it was only after he'd arrested he was starting to think, this could actually, not go away for a while. This might be a big decision I've just made. And I could see that on the torture of his face at various moments. But he was very nice, he was fine, civil, very polite, courteous. So the interesting thing now is, I'm interested to see how far they'll take it, whether they will give me a criminal record, whether they'll give me a prison sentence, or whether, and they'll bottle it. By bottle it, I mean not continuing the case. When I'm in that courtroom in the trial, I won't hold back. So it could get to a higher offence of contempt of court, because I do not intend to, so I'll pull any punches.
Excellent. Well, I think we're just about covered. Anything else you want to say?
No, that's it.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tony Farrell.
Can I have my clothes back?
Thanks very much.
HSBC.
And good luck.
Thanks.